Welcome to the deep dive. You've shared some really interesting source material with us, and we're excited to get into it.
Yeah, absolutely. Today we're looking at a court ruling, specifically one from the High Court in Lagos, Nigeria, dated May 20th, 2025.
Right. And it involves the Nigerian Bottling Company Limited, the Coca-Cola bottlers and some other parties.
Exactly. And look, legal documents, they can be pretty dense, can't they? So our goal here, our mission, is to take this ruling, kind of cut through the legal jargon,
Yeah, it makes sense.
and figure out what actually happened and, more importantly, why it matters, especially if you're not a lawyer. We want to make this seemingly complicated decision totally digestible.
Definitely. And here's the kicker, the thing that jumps out right away. The whole case got thrown out.
Just like that.
Yeah, completely dismissed. But, and this is the fascinating part, it wasn't because the judge looked at the facts and decided who was right or wrong in the actual dispute.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
It was thrown out because of a mistake made right at the beginning. A fundamental error in how the lawsuit was even started.
Okay, so how does that even happen? Let's unpack this.
All right. So first, who are we talking about here? The main players.
Okay. The claimant, that's the one doing the suing, is Nigerian Bottling Company Limited, NBC.
Right. And they were suing several defendants. The ruling mentions Essential Interiors Limited, Joseph Araya, Real Worth Properties Limited, and Victor Guam.
Got it. But the challenge we're focusing on didn't come from all of them, did it?
No, it came specifically from the third and fourth defendants, that's Real Worth Properties, and Victor Guam. The ruling calls them the applicants.
And what did these applicants do?
They filed something called a preliminary objection. Basically, it's like saying, hold on, court. Before we even get into the arguments about who did what, there's a fundamental problem with this case, and you should just dismiss it right now.
And their reason wasn't, we didn't do it.
Nope. Their reason was purely procedural. They argued that NBC started the lawsuit using the wrong method, the wrong process, according to the court's rules. And because of that initial mistake, they claimed the court actually lacked the power. The legal term is jurisdiction to even hear the case at all.
Wow. Okay, so the how you start is really that critical.
Absolutely. It gets to the core of how these legal systems, especially those based on English common law like in Nigeria,
Yeah.
operate. Court procedure isn't just, bureaucratic hoops to jump through.
It's not just red tape.
Exactly. It's foundational. Think of it like this. The court has rules, like a building code. And part of that code says which door you have to use depending on what you're there for. Use the wrong door, and you might not get in, or anything you do inside might be invalid.
So there are different doors, different ways to start a court case.
Precisely. Courts have specific rules about the allowed ways to begin a lawsuit, often called modes of commencement.
Modes of commencement.
And the higher courts, like the Supreme Court of Nigeria, have stressed this point repeatedly. There are defined ways, and you can't just pick and choose. You must use the method prescribed for your type of case in that specific court.
Okay, so what are the main ways, the main doors for this particular court, the High Court of Lagos State?
Well, the court has its own rule book, the High Court of Lagos State Civil Procedure Rules 2019, and they spell it out.
Right.
Order 5, Rule 1 basically says that for most common civil disputes, like if you're claiming damages because someone broke a contract or caused an injury or damaged your property or committed fraud, the standard way, the main entrance, is using what's called a writ of summons.
A writ of summons. Okay, that sounds like the default for many situations.
It generally is. But there's another common method mentioned, an originating summons. That's Order 5, Rule 4.
Originating summons, what's that for?
That's typically used for different kinds of issues, often when there isn't a major fight over the facts, but you need the court to interpret something specific, like the meaning of a clause in a contract, or a will, or maybe a particular law.
Ah, so less about who did what, more about what this document or law actually means.
Exactly. And then asking the court to declare people's rights based on that interpretation. It's a specific tool for a specific job, a different key for a different lock, you could say.
Okay, got it. Writ of summons for general disputes, originating summons for interpretations. Now, the crucial question, which door did Nigerian Bottling Company try to use here?
And this is where it all went wrong for them. They didn't use a writ of summons.
Okay.
And they didn't use an originating summons either.
So what did they use?
They kicked off the lawsuit using something called an originating motion.
Originating motion. Is that even a real door? Is it one of the allowed methods?
Well, yes and no. An originating motion is a valid way to start some legal proceedings. The ruling mentions a case that explains it's often used for specific things like enforcing fundamental human rights or seeking judicial review,
Yeah.
Challenging a government decision or getting certain types of injunctions.
So it exists, but maybe for specific circumstances.
Precisely. And the critical point the applicants raised, and the court ultimately agreed with, was this. The rules of this specific court, the Lagos High Court, simply do not list originating motion as an acceptable way to start the type of general civil claim that NBC was bringing.
Ah, so NBC had a key, maybe a perfectly good key for a different door down the hall, but they tried using it on this particular door, and the court's rulebook said, nope, wrong key for this lock.
That's a perfect analogy. They used a procedure that wasn't provided for or permitted by the court's own rules for that kind of case.
Okay, but why is that single mistake, picking the wrong starting form, such a massive deal? Does it really mean the court just washes its hands of the whole thing no matter what the actual problem was between NBC and the others?
It does, astonishingly. And the ruling points to Supreme Court authority on this. There's a quote mentioned from a case, Oyikin versus Abaragba, where the Supreme Court called the mode of commencement how you start the case, the foundation or substratum upon which all other processes are laid.
Wow, foundation or substratum. That sounds incredibly fundamental.
It really is. It paints a picture, doesn't it? The very first step, how you bring your case into the court system, is the absolute base. If that base is cracked, if it's the wrong type of foundation for the building you're trying to put up, the whole thing is unsound. Exactly. The whole structure built on top of it, all the arguments, the evidence, everything else just can't stand legally. The Supreme Court stressed that the different methods are clearly defined and must be specifically invoked. You have to use the right one.
Okay, so the applicants basically said, wrong foundation, Your Honor, this case can't stand. What was NBC's response? How did they try to argue against this?
Well, NBC's lawyer did fight the objection. Interestingly, part of their argument focused on attacking the paperwork the applicants had filed to support their objections specifically, something called an affidavit, which is just a sworn written statement.
And did that work? Did they find flaws in the applicant's paperwork?
Actually, yes, to some extent. The judge agreed that there were problems with the applicant's affidavit and decided to strike it out, meaning the court wouldn't rely on that specific document.
Ah, so maybe a small win for NBC there.
A very small one, because the judge immediately clarified something crucial. Just because the supporting affidavit had issues didn't mean the applicant's core legal argument was invalid. The argument about the wrong starting procedure, that was a point of law separate from the flawed affidavit.
Gotcha. So fixing the supporting document wouldn't fix the underlying legal problem with how NBC started the case?
Exactly. The legal point stood on its own. And what seemed to compound the problem for NBC, according to the ruling, was that the legal cases and arguments their own lawyer presented, they were actually about originating summons.
Wait, the other procedure, the one for interpretation?
Yeah, they were citing cases relevant to originating summons, but remember, they had actually used an originating motion. So it appears their counter-arguments weren't directly hitting the nail on the head regarding the specific procedure they actually used and why it was permissible.
So they were essentially defending the use of a door they hadn't even tried to open.
It seems that way, based on the ruling summary. So, with NBC's arguments not really addressing the core issue, the court circled back to the applicant's main point,
Which was?
that the case simply wasn't started correctly. An originating motion is not the method allowed by the Lagos High Court rules for this kind of general civil claim.
And the judge agreed with that.
Unequivocally. The judge cited those authorities, like Oyokin v. Abaragba, reiterating that the mode of filing is the absolute foundation of the suit.
And if the foundation is wrong...
Then the court lacks jurisdiction. That's the key consequence. It means the court simply doesn't have the legal authority, the power, to hear the dispute.
So it's not about whether NBC had a good case or bad case on the merits?
Not at this stage, no. The judge couldn't even get to the substance of the dispute, who owed what, who did wrong, because the entry procedure was flawed. The court's hands were tied by its own rules. It wasn't just a minor slip-up. It went to the court's fundamental power to act.
A complete shutdown based purely on getting the first step wrong.
That's the essence of it. It really drives home how vital following the correct procedure is. It's not optional.
Okay, so that leads us directly to the final decision on this preliminary objection.
Yes. The ruling is very clear. The applicant's preliminary objection succeeds. It was upheld by the court.
And the consequence for NBC's lawsuit.
The suit is struck out.
Struck out. What does that mean exactly? Is it gone forever?
Struck out generally means it's removed from the court's list for now because of this procedural defect. It's different from being dismissed on the merits, which would usually mean NBC couldn't try again. So theoretically, NBC could start all over again. By filing a new lawsuit, this time making sure to use the correct procedure, probably a writ of summons. But this original attempt is dead.
And was there a cost associated with this mistake for NBC?
Yes, there was. The court ordered the claimant, NBC, to pay costs to the successful applicant's real-worth properties and Victor Guam. The amount awarded was N50,000.
So not only did their case get thrown out, but they also had to pay the other side for the trouble of pointing out the error.
Exactly. It serves partly to compensate the applicants for their legal expenses in dealing with a suit that was, from the court's perspective, improperly initiated.
Wow. So a detail that might seem really small and technical to an outsider, which form you use to start your case, turns out to be absolutely critical. More critical in this instance than anything else.
It really is the big takeaway here, isn't it? How this procedural step, right at the very start, choosing the correct mode of commencement, was fatal. It wasn't just a hoop. It was the entire foundation. It shows that in law, sometimes the how you do something is every bit as important, maybe even more so initially than what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, it really underscores that. Hopefully this deep dive has helped make that clearer for you, our listeners, how these foundational rules aren't just abstract legal theory, but have real significant consequences, like getting your whole case tossed out before it even gets going.
Definitely. And it makes you wonder, doesn't it? It prompts a thought for you to maybe mull over later. Where else in life, outside of a courtroom, does that initial approach, the foundation you lay, matter so much? Where else can getting step one wrong completely derail everything that follows, no matter how good the rest of your plan or effort is?
That's a really interesting question. Could be anything from building a house to maybe even starting a difficult conversation, right?
Could be. The method matters.
A great thought to end on. Thank you so much for sharing this source material with us, and of course for joining us on this deep dive today. We hope it sheds some light on the surprising power of legal procedure.